Chapter 28. Breaking Down the Walls of Jericho. David's right hand tightly gripped the wheel of the shuttle as he drove through the underground tunnel leading to the power plant. His heart was pounding in his chest as a mixture of natural adrenaline and the crank-up pills rushed through him. The time was drawing near. Soon the team would be breaking into not only a power plant, but David suspected it was the biggest one in existence. At minimum, it was the most hidden and unknown power plant. The team continued to prep and go over the game plan. With the badges they had borrowed from the maintenance team, they would try to infiltrate the facility. If that failed, it would just result in a firefight probably by the time they reached the first door. The upside to the gunfight part was now that they had these badges, there was no need to hope Trace would hack through door security. They could just walk through. The plan was simple in its nature. Get in, record everything, find where the reassigned captives were being held, free them if possible, get Trace into a room that gave him access to the system software, and give him enough time to hack through any possible firewalls and recover any and all information they kept hidden in this place. As they sped through the tunnel following the road that was built down here in the ice tunnel. Conveniently, the roadway in the tunnel had 2 lanes. David recalled that the lead maintenance man, August, had mentioned that the night shift team would also be driving through this tunnel on their way back to the campsite they just left to rest before another switch from shifts. Another pair of headlights suddenly became visible coming from further down the tunnel. To avoid any additional suspicion, David slowed down to a reasonable tunnel speed. This shuttle was already running late since the actual team that was meant to be in it were tied up in a supply closet back at the campsite. The other shuttle van lined up and in a matter of a second or two, passed by with no incident. David let out the breath he didn't realize he was holding. Another handful of minutes passed, and they finally reached the giant double-door entrance to the area where the plant was located. They came to a stop, all of them staring at the doors. David saw a post that was set up like something at an automatic car wash in between where the 2 sections of the tunnel roads were. He pulled up slowly and saw it had a badge reader. "Holy shit," David said in disbelief. "They don't have anyone standing here or anything, just a badge reader." "Makes sense," Ashley started. "It's freezing out there. Not to mention I bet no one here ever thought someone would learn about this place and then try to infiltrate it." David thought about it for a minute, pushing the button to open the window of his door, then nodded his head in agreement as he pressed August Mitchell's badge up against the reader. The light went from red to green, and the sounds of locks unlatching came from the double doors. As they separated, the bottom portion of the power plant became visible to them. The sheer size of the structure was overwhelming. Their initial vantage from above the pit did not prepare them for the up-close immensity of the structure. As they pulled forward into the pit where the power plant stood, David noticed a parking lot to the left and smiled. "Boy, it's a good thing we beat the traffic from the commute, am I right? Otherwise, we'd have to park all the way in the back," David joked. "Jesus Christ, what a dumbass." Trace snorted as Dolly and Ashley groaned in disapproval of the lame-ass remark. Brick, as always, stay emotionless and quiet. David just pretended that was Brick's way of saying it was funny. They pulled into a space in the parking lot and came to a stop near a couple other shuttles that had been parked. David took a deep breath, then looked back at everyone. "Everyone ready?" he asked. There was a collective yes and head nods from the team, and he opened the driver door and stepped out. The rest also began to exit the shuttle van. They moved with purpose and urgency, while technically, they didn't know if they had a cover to blow yet with their improvised plan. But David knew the longer they could avoid gunshots, the better the plan fared. They reached the entrance door, and David took a moment to look around. The security continued to be minimal, but again, like Ashley had pointed out, with the sub-zero weather of the location, it wasn't much of a surprise that no one was out here waiting. Trace stepped up to the door and pressed his stolen badge up against the reader. A moment passed, and just as before, the red light turned to green, and the door was open to them. David took his first steps into the power plant NP1, and he realized they were most likely the first 5 people to ever enter a power plant building without government or corporate clearance. The meaning of this moment felt like a massive accomplishment, but unlike other pivotal moments of exploration, like the first space exploration, There was no one watching at home celebrating this step. The walls within the entry hall were as sterile, white, and smooth-looking as the outside had been. The moment the door closed behind them, the surrounding area grew startlingly quiet, aside from the distant drones of machines humming. The entry hall was long, with only one way to go, making their choice of where to go next easy. Another door at the end of the hallway awaited them. For a moment, none of them moved. David took a tentative step forward, then another, moving past the rest of the team, who had still been standing in shock. He kept moving towards the door on the other end of the hall. Once he got to it, he looked back. The team was hastily moving to catch up with him, now that they had overcome their initial shock. He looked down at the door and saw that it had no handle, only a badge reader. He lifted August Mitchell's badge and pressed it up against the reader. The door moved, sliding open with a smooth and silent motion, just like some old science fiction movie scene. David knew this technology existed and was more common in high-security clearance work areas, but in his public and common life, sliding high-tech doors weren't the norm. He walked into the next space in high alert, as did the rest of the team. Before he had been able to absorb his new surroundings or think of what his next action to take should be, an agitated voice came from his left that made him jump. "Shit, Mitchell. What took you guys so long this morning?" David jerked his head over and saw a man in a white coat with his back turned to them. He was messing with some computer, and apparently the man assumed that August Mitchell and his crew were the arrivals and hadn't visually verified. David knew this luck wasn't going to last, because once the man heard or looked at him, the jig would be up. Realizing this was a key moment, he observed the rest of the room quickly and quickly identified, this must be some sort of check-in area when you first entered the plant, the first real security point. The man began to turn to face them, but using all the adrenaline that had been building up in him, David rushed forward while drawing his right arm all the way back, striking the man squarely in his head. The man crumpled to the floor, with his eyes rolling back into his sockets. The blow had happened so fast, the man had not made a sound, besides the thud of his body hitting into the desk on its way to the floor. "Well, that was lucky," David said, looking back at the team. But they didn't look back at him. They kept staring forward. So, David turned to look in the same direction. There were two other white-coated individuals in the room, both of whom did not have their backs turned, and saw David bash the other man in the head. "Oh shit," David said, as the two white coats began to make a break for it, like deer in the woods, frozen until they heard the sound of an approaching predator. "Don't let them alert anyone," David stated in a hushed shout, carrying the weight of the situation as he raced toward one of the fleeing white coats. As he dashed for the one closest to the exit, his heart pounded in fear. If this person got out and alerted whoever it was they needed to, the remainder of their plan was going to get very complicated. On a reflex, he pulled up his pistol and took aim at the back of the person's knees. It was the automatic pistol the teenage necks in Montreal had given him, and he fired a wave of bullets at the person's legs. He watched as the back of the pants suddenly shook like air had run through them, and the white-coated woman fell screaming in agony. David kept moving towards her, even though she wouldn't be moving nearly as fast towards the door now. He took a moment to look over at the other white coat. It was a man, maybe in his early 50s. His age and untrained body had just become his biggest enemy, as he was barely able to get halfway to the spot the woman had before Brick got to him. Unlike David, Brick didn't waste time with being sympathetic. Brick grabbed the man's right shoulder and thrusted him around the bee face-to-face with Brick. A fast and unyielding right metal-laced fist landed directly in the middle of the man's face. While this wasn't the first time David had witnessed one of Brick's merciless assaults, it was still a momentary shock to watch. In a split second, the forceful impact had landed squarely in the center of the man's face, a violent collision that shattered the delicate equilibrium of life within him, extinguishing existence as swiftly as a snuffed candle flame. David made it to the woman in the white coat and turned her around on the floor. She had tried to drag herself the rest of the way to the door and left a trail of fresh blood on the sterile white floor. She was maybe 30-something, and her eyes were wide with fear. She looked up at him, her body shaking uncontrollably. Please don't kill me," she said as tears welled up in her eyes. David looked down and saw a badge on her coat. It read, "Dr. Abigail West, He began to feel anger in his stomach. "Dr. West," David said, "tell me, doctor, do you work with the reassigned here?" As he finished saying it, her mouth opened as wide as her eyes had been. I'm so sorry. It's just a job, please," she pleaded. David's eye twitched at her statement. "Just a job," she said, "holding people against their will, people like his father, to work in places like this, and it's just a job to her." He lost his cool in that moment and struck her with his fist as hard as he could. The force behind his blow knocked her unconscious as if it was something out of a movie, and she went limp. David never really thought of himself as someone who would strike a woman, but if you combine this event with the large woman on the flashing line, he was building quite a resume for it. He snatched up her badge and faced the others. "Grab the other guy's badge. They may be useful. We need to be ready for a fight to break out. If we are lucky, this place will be filled with maintenance crews, scientists like these three, and the reassigned. Hopefully, they won't think anyone like us would ever come this far out." Brick moved to grab the dead man's badge. Ashley reached down over the first white coat and grabbed his. Then they moved towards the door the woman had tried to go through. David placed her badge on the reader, and the door slid open like the others before it. They passed into a network of sterile white hallways. The place looked like it was built to be a maze. The air had an oddly chemical smell to it, like a hospital. They made it to the first intersection of hallways and found signs hanging overhead directing passers-by to different locations. David looked down at the right hall and saw 2 white coats walking the other way, their backs turned on the 5 of them. That way led to a section called C1 Monitoring and Evaluation. He looked down at Dr. West's badge and saw it read A5 section, like August Mitchell's had. He looked up at the other 3 signs. The sign that led straight read B1 Storage and Output. The hall that led to the left read A1 Reassignment and Input. He looked at the others. "We have badges for A5 clearance. How much you want to bet that means a 5th level of reassignment and input?" he asked the other 4. Ashley nodded her head. "I think David may be right. We might not be able to get into any of those other sections," she stated. "Trace," David said, "if we got you to any operating system in A5, think you could find a way into all the NP1's intel? Like at DOE?" he asked. Trace's left eye focused on David. "It's possible. I won't know for sure until I get jacked in somewhere," Trace replied. "All right, then let's head down this way. Maybe it'll lead us towards A5, and we will be able to get in that way," David said, and he began moving quickly. As they rushed through the sterile white hall that led to the A1 section, David couldn't believe how easy their infiltration had been so far. However, he also knew it was far from over and was most definitely going to get tougher. But besides the hiccup in the check-in area, they hadn't really ran into anyone else. As David pondered this, it struck him as very strange that a place this large, with as much energy being sent here in the network of power plants, was so empty. Maybe everyone is already in the sections they are supposed to be in, David thought to himself as they raced through the hall that led to A1. Once they got within range to see the door that was labeled "A Section Sites," Ashley let out an audible squeak. "We are getting close." As they reached the door, it opened, and 4 people stood on the other side, 2 white coats and 2 maintenance workers. When they saw the 5 of them rushing toward the door, the 2 white coats stood staring like simple-minded fools. One of the maintenance workers realized what was happening and reached over to press a button. Both David and Brick raised their weapons, but Brick, being a trained killer, and with all his extremities, was quicker on the draw. He pumped 3 shots of his assault shotgun faster than David had time to aim and pull his trigger. The man who was reaching for the button went falling back into the others. Blood splattered from the man's chest as he and the others ate spray from the shots. But it was enough to stop them from alerting anyone or closing the door. They got up to the door, and David realized it was an elevator with a door on the other side. The men that had just been shot by Brick were moaning in pain onto the floor. All but the maintenance man, who took the brunt of the shots, were still alive. Brick, without blinking, executed the other 3. The 5 of them got on the elevator with the dead men. Once inside, the elevator read simply, "Level A1, you are here. Level A2, Level A3, Level A4, Level A5, and so on for another 70 levels. "Holy fuck," Trace said as they stared at the options. "It's just so much." Dolly said in her Western Beach accent. But David saw this as a sign opportunity. "This is perfect," he said, and everyone looked at him as he pressed the 5th level button. I'm sorry, David, but how is this perfect?" Ashley said. He looked over at her with a grin. "This place is massive. 70 levels gives us a lot of space to hide. That means we can move around easier, if each level has as many people as the first did." "That's hoping for a lot, man," Trace said as he checked the streaming connection. "Maybe, but it doesn't hurt us as much as it hurts them." "We can use this," David said. The elevator suddenly stopped, and the light went from a bright clear to high alert red hue. An alarm began to ring as the 5 of them looked around in confusion. "We've been made," Brick said calmly. "Aw shit," Trace wailed. "And we are stuck in a goddamn elevator. We are fucked." But Brick began to mess with the covering above the elevator, and David picked up on what the giant man was doing. "We can get out up there. We only have one more level to go. I'm willing to bet we can climb it," David said. But Trace looked back at him, with a glare indicating that what David said sounded dumb as shit. "Maybe Brick can climb a rope. Maybe even the ladies can. But maybe you forgot the part where I'm no damn soldier. I type on a computer, you think I can climb rope? And you don't even have a left hand, you numbnut," Trace yelled as Brick continued to move the elevator ceiling out of the way. "Shut up," Brick said. "Worse comes to worse. I'll carry the both of you one at a time up the damn thing. Besides, we hit level 4 and kept climbing before the thing stopped. We may be closer than you think." The calm and brick-deep voice somehow eased David's mind. He was able to refocus on the task. Brick found the maintenance hatch for the elevator and forced it open. Then, he lifted all the others up and out, and then pulled himself up. As he pulled himself out, though, the sheer size of the man made the elevator sway. All of them had to crouch down and grab onto something on the elevator out of fear of falling. Brick made quick work of closing the opening, and as the others stood there on the elevator in the shaft, David looked for the 5th level's door. About 10 feet above them, there it was. "Fuck," David said simply. Everyone else looked up to where he was looking and saw it too. "What the hell's the plan now?" Dolly asked. Brick moved up next to the edge of the elevator. "One of you come here and I'll boost you up. Pry the door open," he said. David started toward him, but Brick raised his hand at him. "Maybe someone with 2 hands, hombre," Brick said. It was strange. Even now, after everything David had done to get here, something as simple as opening an elevator door was a job he couldn't do. There was a stinging pain in his chest as he grappled with the reality over and over that so many basic things were suddenly just things he either couldn't do or could only do after great difficulty. Trace came forward, and Brick raised him up. It took Trace longer than it should have to get the doors to open, and David could only think that he wasn't kidding Irreler. He was weak. But he finally got it opened and struggled his way up onto the level. He turned around. "All right, quickly. Give me someone else." David was next. Even with one hand, he would be stronger at lifting the others, and it would give them a chance to have someone cover them with a weapon while they pulled the others up. Once David was up, he pulled his pistol out of its holster and stared down the small lobby area the elevator had taken them to. The room, as with all the other rooms, was sterile white. He heard Trace struggling to lift the next person. It was Dolly. Then Ashley. Finally, all that remained below in the shaft was Brick. The man was too large for them to simply grab by the arms and lift. He was 400 or so pounds of man and metal. David took his eyes off the lobby door for a moment and yelled down so Brick could hear him over the alarm. "Think you can jump it?" David asked. Brick was nearly 7 feet tall. If he jumped and raised his hands up, he had a good shot to catch the lip of the doorway. Maybe, maybe not. "If I miss, I am willing to bet I die here." Brick said, his voice lacking any indication of fear over what he just said. Come again?" David asked. "I doubt the cables will be able to handle me jumping on this thing like that. If I jump, the elevator may snap and go falling. If I miss the jump, I go down with it." Brick said. "Oh shit," David said. "Well, don't miss," he said with a half-assed smile. Brick repositioned his footing, looked up, and then, as quickly as he could, thrusted his body up, swinging his arms reaching for the floor of the 5th level. He caught it, though only with his fingers. The elevator made some metallic moaning sounds once his feet left it, and the elevator rocked back and forth, but did not fall like Brick thought it might. However, had he missed grabbing the ledge and landed back down there, it was very possible that would have caused it to give way. As Brick slowly began to pull himself up, David turned back to the lobby door and saw two armed guards in blue walking through the door, listening to someone on the radio talk to them. He pulled his pistol out of its holster, right as they looked up, and began to register the 5 of them at the elevator door. As they began to reach for their own weapons, David pulled the trigger of his automatic pistol. The bullets sprayed over the guards. One fell almost immediately. The other turned away, as if looking away from a horrible sight, and then fell as bullets landed in his back. Brick was up now, and David didn't have time to process the quick draw kills he just committed. He could dwell on it later, like he had done in the past. They crossed the lobby to the door the guards had just come through. The sign above the door read, A5 reassignment and input. Using the ID card from Dr. West, David opened the door. This new section of the plant reminded David of a hospital in a strange way. This area, much like what they had seen so far, was sterile white. But now there were multiple doors that branched out into several different rooms. The alarm and flashing red lights were still going off, and once someone pinpointed the dead guards in the lobby, they would be able to find where the 5 of them had gone. David, without thinking, opened the first door they came across and jumped in without thinking. He looked back at the others. "Come on, we can't keep staying in the halls and lobbies like we have been," David hissed. The others followed him in. The room they entered was filled with advanced-looking medical and technical equipment. A chair sat in the center of the room as well. They all began to spread out looking for anything that could give them an indication of what this was. Ashley had moved over to the chair, while David and Trace had gone over to a computer in the room. Trace jacked in and began to check out the firewalls and defense systems of the plant. "Think you can shut off the alarms?" David asked, his thought process being maybe it'll give the impression that they had been captured. Give me a minute, I can check. Fuck, my heart is racing," Trace said. David realized that while yes, his heart was pounding too, the crank-up pills were now beginning to wear off, and he was going to be faced with depleted energy levels soon. If he slowed down too much while they were still in NP1, he would become a liability. While Trace began to enter the plant's software mainframe from the access port, he found on the computer to test the security measures. Ashley drew David's attention. "David, I think you should see this." David noted something in her tone had shifted, grabbing his attention. He walked over to where Ashley was, by the chair in the middle of the room. The chair, that he had not given much thought to when they first entered the room, was white, like most things in the power plant. But he also noticed the armrests had restraining straps. In fact, every part where a human being would sit in the chair, there were restraints. Behind the back of the chair, where the head would rest, was a small gap, and behind the chair, you saw it was attached to a bunch of machinery, with a large arm-like extension protruded from the machinery and a thick black needle that looked to be aimed right for the gap in the headrest. "What the hell is this?" David asked. Although just looking at the long, thick black needle, something told him he wouldn't want the answer. The needle's arm, he noted, also had wiring that connected to the needle and followed down into an empty slot in the machinery. "It almost looks like some sort of surgery chair," Ashley said. Dolly noticed them looking at the chair and now came over to examine it as well. "That looks like some fucked up surgery if that's the case," she said. Brick, who was guarding the door with his shotgun, looked over. "Surgical torture can create the perfect slave labor. They won't question what they are being told to do. Cartel did the same with sex workers. Drug 'em, beat 'em, rape 'em. Over time, someone stops caring and just does what is required," Brick said with no emotion in his tone whatsoever. David looked back at the chair. He thought about his father being strapped to something like this and being drugged, tortured, and hazed into total submission. "Bunch of fucking disgusting corrupt fucks," yelled Dolly. There were tears coming down her face. David remembered she had lost her husband, Bannon's son, the same way David's father had been lost. He also had been reassigned some years back, and the revelation that her husband had been put through this clearly was having a major impact on her. Suddenly, the alarm sound stopped, and the flashing red lights went off. Trace let out a victorious shout. "Aha! Stupid shitbags didn't see my badass self coming through here," Trace declared as he sat huddled by the computer still typing away on his laptop. You broke through? David asked, coming back over to where Trace was. Oh yeah, the security system was pretty easy. The rest of the shit does look fairly encrypted, but with time I can replicate some clearance codes and break through. Just need time. But I am in the security software, Trace said as he ran through software coding on his laptop screen. Can you see where and how the security system was activated? Where we screwed up? David asked him. Trace ran through a few screens quickly. Then the monitor on the computer he had jacked into showed camera footage. The system they have in place has a certain auto activations, but it looks like the alarm that was triggered was manually started. Someone turned it on, which must mean someone must have stumbled onto the people we worked our magic on. Trace said he started in the campsite garage tunnel entry, where they took the maintenance team's badges and shuttle, but the footage showed no real change from how they had left it. The screen flipped over to the entry points, and Trace began to rewind the footage in all 4 entry check-in areas. They had entered from the entryway marked 3, but about 20 minutes after they had come through that entryway, the entryway marked 1 showed a shocking sight. The SDT agents Anderson and Madsen, followed by a team of 10 additional fully armored soldiers, entered. As soon as they did, the tubby Anderson pulled a radio up to his chubby cheek on screen and spoke into it. Can we get sound on that, Trace? David asked. Suddenly, the sound that joined the footage came through the monitor's speakers. Initiate a security breach and lockdown. NP1 is under terrorist attack. All non-combat personnel remain hidden until alarm systems are shut down. Combat personnel in NP1, arm yourselves with tranq-based weaponry. The terrorists must be apprehended alive. Came the voice of Agent Anderson. David couldn't believe it. How did the SDT find them out here? After leaving Montreal, they all assumed the SDT wouldn't be able to track them down, since every move they made from then on was in the dark. Not only did they follow them, but they had also followed them and caught up to them very quickly. How the hell? David started, but trailed off in shock. They knew we would be here, Ashley said, coming up beside Trace and David. This is going to complicate things. Trace said, if they find us before I'm done, we don't get any intel, just footage of us dicking around. I need time to break through the firewalls. He continued. How much time? Brick said. I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 minutes. The firewall they have in place is solid, more so than the DOE, but they are weak in employee data storage. If given some time, I can avoid the firewalls by taking someone's access and get in that way, Trace said. His body was beginning to shake with the weight of the time constraint. Then I will make you some time, Brick said. He began to go for the door. Wait, Dolly said, pulling out her gun and checking how much ammo she had left. I'll come with you. The more of us there are, the better we stand to keep them busy. Brick nodded at her. I'll go too, Ashley said, moving over towards them. David followed behind her. No, you can't go. She turned and smiled at him weakly. David, the more of us creating the distraction for Trace, the better our chances are, she said as she moved closer and leaned her head on his chest. Don't worry, I know this ends one of 2 ways. If done right, it ends the way we want. Us together and alive. As she spoke, he looked down into her face. Then she kissed him. A simple kiss, but he could taste the warmth of her lips, even though the last couple days had left both of them with chapped lips. Then she let go of him and moved to exit the room with Brick and Dolly. David stood there for a moment, just staring at the door after the 3 had left, and it closed. Something about it made him feel uneasy, and he had to push away the thought that it may have been the last time he would see her. He turned back around to Trace, trying to focus on the mission. Well, how we looking, Trace? David said, trying to reassert his old confident self in his tone. I'm currently running through the employee files, attempting to nail down the highest level of access any one employee has. Just give me a minute. Trace switched a few things on his laptop quickly. The monitor that was showing the security files flipped to show real-time camera footage of Ashley, Brick, and Dolly moving through the building now. There, Trace said. That'll help keep you busy while you guard our door. Real-time footage, the security system can track employee badges around. It seems that they have an auto-feature AI that can detect when someone isn't wearing one. That's why we didn't go ping right away. The system didn't think to send our arrival to a guard post for review. He finished. David watched as the 3 walked through the rest of A5 level. His eyes on Ashley, She followed behind Brick, which was a smart strategy. The giant didn't flinch when it came to pulling a trigger. He looked back over at the door to the room they were in and pulled out his pistol from its holster. He dropped the remaining clip out of the gun. He only had about 2 to 5 shots left and figured it would be smart to have a full clip ready. The next 10 minutes was agonizing. As he flicked his eyes from the door to Trace to the monitor following Brick, Dolly, and Ashley. The trio at one point ran into 2 guards who were combing the level. Although both Dolly and Ashley took aim, Brick's powerful shotgun did most of the work. David also noted Dolly was throwing caution to the wind more so than ever. He wondered if she was being more reckless due to the emotional trauma of finding the chair and assuming the horrors her husband went through in a similar device. "Got it," Trace finally said. "What did you find?" David asked. "Dr. Regis Tan. His employee ID has full access. He looks like the guy overseeing this whole plant," Trace said. He began to run through several screens now. "Yeah, that's right, baby. I'm just Dr. Tan now. Open those cyber legs wide for me," Trace said as he started logging into multiple screens with Tan's name. "Can you start with reassignment? We need to find where these people have been placed." He knew the bigger question was, why were they doing this to people in the first place? But he also wanted to know the possible whereabouts of his father. Trace flicked a few screens, then stopped on a study created by Dr. Elizabeth Fields, NP1 Director of Reassignment Theory and Research. The study, which was apparently only meant for Site Director Tan's eyes, was very long and came with videos and photos of the study she conducted. Trace jumped past the opening introduction and straight into the meat of the study. "We have found the traditionally held belief that subduing the reassigned individual before the actual operation can somewhat hinder and prolong the procedure. Although when kept fully aware during the operation, the reassigned shows more fear and pain throughout the procedure. However, with them fully aware, the energy extraction proves to move much quicker, yielding a higher pull and creating an overall more efficient operation. When left under the influence of numbing agents or fully unconscious, we discovered the extraction takes longer, pulling harder on the machine's abilities and the power output of the machine itself. While both end in the same result for the reassigned individual being fully extracted, keeping them alert and awake for the procedure does in fact use less power on the machines, which in effect means we are saving and producing more energy via this route. The question becomes, do we choose to cause someone immense pain through the procedure? Or do we give them the human dignity of a less painful and more humane extraction? My personal belief as a scientist and doctor is to continue with numbing agents to provide a more humane extraction for these reassigned individuals. As David read the study, both he and Trace grew very silent. He was no longer focused on anything else. "There's a video," Trace said softly as he clicked on the research video. A woman with short black hair and sharp facial features appeared on screen. Although David wouldn't consider her as attractive as Ashley, she had a more ordinary pretty face. But you might not be able to tell right away. Her facial expression was somewhat hard and expressionless. She looked like someone who hadn't smiled in years and forgot how to do so. She was maybe in her early 30s and wore the white coat of the PowerPlant scientist. "Today, an individual was transported here to NP1 as per our request to the rest of the PowerPlant network. This individual was slated for reassignment in the CA-151 PowerPlant. Thankfully, Dr. Tan reached out and was able to acquire them before the procedure was carried out." She turned her back to the camera and walked over to a monitor, like the one David and Trace were by now. She began to work on it, while another white coat fiddled with something behind a chair that was set up just like the one in the room they were in. Only this one had someone in it, a woman, to be exact, a strong-looking, athletic woman. She was strapped into the chair and was trying to fight against her restraints. They had used a restraint on the top of her head to keep her from moving it. The white coat behind the chair looked over to where Dr. Fields was standing. "Prepping extraction entry point. Systems ready, doctor?" the white coat asked. Dr. Fields looked over to the monitor again. "Yes, please begin entry procedures, Dr. Gear," Dr. Fields requested. Her voice sounded like it was coming out of someone on their deathbed. Then, the sound of the large black needle's machinery began to move. The sudden, faint sounds of skin and bone being surgically pressed through as the woman tethered to the chair stopped thrashing for a moment. Her eyes went wide, and she let out a horrified, pain-filled shriek. "Extraction needle has breached through. Doctor, can you confirm placement on screens?" said the doctor, called Gear. "Yes, extraction needle is placed at optimal location in the brainstem. You may begin extraction when ready, doctor," Dr. Fields said to the other white coat. "Beginning now," the other one said as he flicked a button somewhere near the machinery. Suddenly, the woman stopped screaming for a moment. She stiffened up her body tightly, and her mouth opened and closed as if she was trying to speak. Then, as both doctors continued to communicate, readouts to one another, she finally broke through whatever was stopping her from speaking. "Please, please, please," the woman kept shouting until she suddenly stopped and her body went limp. There was a brief pause where nothing was said. "Extraction complete. Time reading of 2 minutes 10 seconds. That's our fastest yet," said Dr. Gear. Dr. Fields moved away from the monitor and back to face the camera. "Once again, we have performed the entire extraction procedure within record time when we do not subdue the reassigned. But, as noted in our study, the individual in the procedure experiences extreme duress. My personal recommendation on this study is we continue to apply numbing agents to those being reassigned, for humane purposes," Dr. Fields said into the camera before turning it off. Under the study's findings, a note from Director Tan was left. "Thank you to both Dr. Gear and Dr. Fields who oversaw this study. Your breakthrough in understanding and review of the reassignment procedure is of extreme importance. While I have heavily considered Dr. Fields' recommendation to not change current protocols, the findings of the energy being saved cannot be overlooked. Going forward, NP1 will perform reassignment without the use of sedatives and will be notifying all other power plants within the network to begin following in the same footsteps. Signed, Dr. Regis Tan, NP1 Site Director." David and Trace stood there motionless and silent for a moment. David was trying to come to grips with the reality of what this meant. "Jesus fucking Christ, man. They kill the reassigned," Trace said, his voice wavering as he spoke. David just numbly shook his head. They drain them empty of the energy in their heads and store them like excess batteries," David said softly. He realized this was the fate of his father when he was reassigned. They strapped him into a chair and sucked the life out of him until nothing remained but the husk of his body. He looked away from the monitor for a moment in pure disgust and even felt slightly faint. The hope of finding his father in a slave labor camp had evaporated. His father was long gone, sucked up, and then dispensed out as fucking energy to be used to turn on TVs, cars, lawnmowers, lights, or whatever powered amenity someone wanted to use. An uncontrollable rage began to boil over within him. "Why the fuck do they do it? Find the answers, Trace. Find them now," David yelled. Trace jumped a little, then began typing some more. "All right, man. All right. I'll try to find something," Trace stammered. "Make sure everything in Tan's folders get uploaded to our streaming link," David commanded. "It is. Don't worry, man. It is," Trace said again. David regained some of his composure and took a minute to check the door. No one had yet found them. He looked back at the monitor following Brick, Dolly, and Ashley. They were in a firefight with 4 guards on a giant catwalk in a massive-looking room where long shelves held tubes. The tubes on the shelves looked like the type of tubes you find in a bank drive-thru, and during the gunfight, a giant mechanical arm on a conveyor moved towards one of the racks and grabbed several tubes at once, then raced off to another location. David realized the trio had found their way into a storage area where the tubes must have been holding the energy that was pulled out of the reassigned. "I think I got something. It's a study from another doctor. A Dr. Liam Stuckey, Director of PowerPlant Technology and History," Trace said. He opened the study, also something that was meant only for Dr. Regis Tan to see. It was named The Other Gods, PowerPlant History, and Human Involvement. Trace scrolled through like he had with the prior study and found what David wanted. Historically speaking, our modern society's first meeting with the others unofficially occurred in 1947 with the Roswell incident. The official public story being that a weather balloon crashed in a farmer's field. The UFO community believes a flying saucer crash landed there, and that our government chose to hide the truth. Our official understanding of those events, as we know, is that in 1947 in Roswell, New Mexico, A flying vessel that did not use common propulsion landed in the field. It did not crash, nor was there any ETs aboard the vessel. There was communication from the others, however. They used this event to officially notify our society of their nature and our relation to it. They claimed to have been the creators of our race with genetic manipulation of select species on the planet. They informed us the sole purpose of our creation was to perform work to generate energetic output for them to power their own society. They also promised advanced living and technical innovation for our species as a reward for fulfilling our role in the natural universal order. Thus, we were given the early adaptations of PowerPlant technologies. Based off further studies of the gods' claims, we can believe they may have very well repeated this process on not only Earth, but many other planets, though we have no concrete proof on the latter theory, only that we know they keep a permanent presence here via a station within the moon. We can infer, however, that the PowerPlant technology may have been used throughout human history. It appears that a multitude of human uprisings and advancement may have been sparked by their intervention, and then, at the apex of that human civilization, they reduced the society back to a hunter-gatherer species as a form of course correction. We cannot say with extreme certainty how many human civilizations have achieved a similar software innovation like we have, or why they were reset, only we know it has happened. We have unearthed and promptly covered up any indication that these other prior societies achieved similar feats by use of the federal government, in tandem with other international powers. It is imperative we keep the mainstream narrative that we are the peak of human advancement. We also have moved away from referring to the others as gods, like the prior civilizations have. Instead, we rely on the technology aspect. Coupled with introduction of chemical balance theory, we find that people are less likely to challenge the narrative. We anticipate being able to keep our civilization standing, and hope that in time we'll be rewarded with further technological advancement to begin our own space-based travel and expansion. Underneath the end of the lengthy study, which broke down in detail each of the claims of the section they had just read, was Dr. Tan's note. Thank you, Dr. Stuckey, for your team's amazing and in-depth study on the history of our advancement. I personally believe it is crucial for us, who operate directly under the supervision of the others, to fully understand the gravity of our situation. We would not merely want to replicate past failures, would we? In science, it is always imperative to learn from prior experiments and further streamline the process. With this detailed analysis, we stand to outperform and exceed any human civilizations that came before us. This is straight up bullshit, snapped Trace, breaking David out of his shell shock. Aliens! I'm supposed to believe the corrupt rulers of our world actually are just doing the bidding of fucking E.T., he continued. But David wasn't so skeptical. Trace, it says it all right there. Holy shit, man. We are basically some charge-up station on a universal assembly line or something, David said, trying to wrap his head around the fact that the answers he had been seeking out were right there in front of him, and he was still struggling to accept it. No way, man. This is just some kind of trick or something, like a fake document or study or something like disinformation, Trace retorted. Think about it, man. Why would this science dude send his director a fake study? It's not like the study is being sent out to the world. We have only seen it now because you are pretending to be Dr. Tan, David said. Can you upload everything on Dr. Tan's computer? He asked Trace. Yeah, I guess I can. Why? Trace asked. Because whatever Tan knows, everyone is going to know now, David replied. Trace began to remote into Tan's desktop network and began a copy and save streaming application. Then the door of the room slid open suddenly, and David looked over. At first, there was nothing there in the doorway. Then a small little remote type of gizmo rolled in on 2 wheels. It stopped in front of David and Trace, then exploded in a flashing bang of light and sound. David's world became a place of ringing sounds and white blurs. He lost his equilibrium and slipped on something with his foot. He blindly reached for his pistol and aimed where he thought the door was and pressed down on the trigger. His vision was fading back into existence, and he could make out figures. 2 were on the ground shuffling around, and 3 more stood near the door. David felt pinching sensations in his right forearm and his left knee. He looked down and saw, to his horror, a high-dosage tranq dart pumping sleeping agents into his bloodstream. The effects were almost immediate. He began to give way to his body passing out. As he lay on his side on the ground trying to desperately cling to consciousness, a large, ruddy, fat face came into focus with a wolfish, yellow-toothed smile. "Hello, Mr. Nash," said the vile Agent Anderson. "Glad to finally catch up again." Then David Nash's world fell to black, right as he discovered the truth of the PowerPlants.